What's up, gamers? So, the second ever VimJam just finished. If you're not familiar with what VimJam is, it's a game jam hosted by Vimlark and 8 Bits to Infinity. Vimlark is an incredible content creator here on YouTube. If you're not subscribed to him already, you should definitely go check his stuff out. But if you're watching this video, you're probably already subscribed to him. And you should subscribe to me too. And 8 Bits to Infinity is a fantastic game dev community that holds regular jams and challenges. Now, I've been a huge fan of Vimlark's content for a long time. His YouTube videos are a big part of why I even started posting game dev content to YouTube in the first place, so I've been super excited to get my chance to participate in a VimJam. And this jam has a format that I really appreciate. Instead of the usual 48 or 72-hour jams, it's 10 days long. This means I have enough time to be a human. I get to sleep, I get to cook, normal stuff, as well as having enough time to actually get everything polished and completed before I have to submit by the end. And another interesting thing about the format of this jam is that instead of just having a theme, there's a theme and a requirement. So let's start at the beginning, day 1. The jam opened up with a theme reveal, giving us a complete picture of the theme and the requirement. For this jam, the theme was on the edge, and the requirement is boss. One common piece of advice that you'll get for game jams is that you should get rid of the first idea that you have, because a lot of other game devs will have that same first thought, and if you follow that thread, you'll end up making a game that's extremely similar to a bunch of other game devs. So obviously, we have to subvert the idea of a boss, and instead of having like a boss fight, we can have like a manager or something like that. And that leads really well into on the edge, because it follows so obviously that you can be on the edge of being fired by your boss. Honestly, it leads almost a little too well into that idea. And that's when I realized that my first thought wasn't to have a boss fight. My first thought was to subvert a boss fight and have this on the edge of being fired thing. And I had this feeling that a bunch of other game devs would think the exact same way, and we would end up with a shitload of games where it was on the edge of being fired by your boss. And I was absolutely correct. Out of all the games that I played to judge for this jam, at least like a half of them followed that format. Also, I thought to myself that a game jam with the requirement of a boss should be a jam that you get to play a bunch of cool boss fights. That's what I was looking forward to at the end of the jam. And, as some of my viewers will already know, I used to work at 343 Industries on Halo Infinite for a couple of years. And one of the tasks that I was assigned and completed was to program the final boss fight for Halo Infinite. Now, obviously I can't go into any specific details about that, but suffice it to say that making a boss fight is something that I have a lot of experience with. So I felt pretty good about going down this path for this game jam. I thought I could successfully make a cool boss fight. I've done it before for Halo. But that still leaves the theme, on the edge. Now, edge immediately brings up imagery of swords, so while I was trying to think of how I could make a boss fight that deals with being on the edge, I remembered Marth, and in Super Smash Bros., he deals the most damage on the tip of his sword. And so I just yoinked that idea right from Smash Bros. And decided that I could have a character that only deals damage on the edge of her sword, meaning the tip. Now, I know a sword is technically all edge, right? But whatever. I hammered out a few other design details, like making it an action platformer and how I wanted it to feel and like the screen ratio and all that stuff, before I jumped into designing the main character. Now, I had quite a few false starts that I was unhappy with, but on my 4th try, I ended up making a character that I really liked. So I took that character sprite and threw it into Godot with some super simple platforms just scattered around, and I set up some very basic player movement, tweaking it until I got the feeling that I wanted for this game. And that's all I had time for on day 1, which brings us to day 2. Now, day 2 was dedicated to getting Isadora looking fresh. I spent most of the day solely on animating her. I made her run cycle, her jump frame, her fall frames, 3 different slash animations that together make up the entirety of her 3-hit combo. I made her death animation, as well as her spawning animation, and a frame to use for when she takes damage. I got this all exported and put into the game, and I made sure to export it based on layers, and got those set up correctly in the animation player so that the game understood which sprites to use based on what state you were in, which lets you attack while you're running, or jump and attack without messing up the animation state of the legs. I also set up some standard player logic to give her HP as well as basic hitboxes and hurtboxes, and set her up with a dash move that gave her some temporary invincibility frames. Just all that basic scaffolding for a player character. And that took up all of day 2, which brings us to Day 3. Now, I've mentioned in previous devlogs that I'm kind of cursed when it comes to game jams. Whenever I do a game jam, something goes horribly, horribly wrong. So on day 3, I woke up and I went downstairs to go into my office and get to work. And as I was doing that, I heard the sounds of heavy rain. And I was excited to get to work because I love it when it's raining. The smell and the sound just keeps me in a relaxed state while also helping me focus. So I got to my desk, I sat down, I turned and looked out the window to a beautiful sunny day. After a couple seconds of my brain malfunctioning, I realized that I couldn't be hearing rain, so I went to where I heard the source of it and opened the door to my garage, where I found that my hot water heater had exploded and was just spraying water all over the garage. So I quickly shut off the cold water intake so that it would stop spraying everywhere, and then spent the next several hours cleaning up the water, as well as contacting people to come and do a replacement so that I could have hot water again. Unfortunately, the earliest anyone could get in was Saturday, which was almost a week later, so I had to spend almost the entire game jam without any hot water. Plus, new hot water heaters aren't cheap, so I had to spend a couple $1,000s on getting the old one removed and taken out after it exploded and getting a new one installed. So the game jam curse definitely struck again. But after getting that all settled, it was time to actually get to making the enemies for the game, which was my plan for the day in the first place. I started by making a little demon bat guy and creating animations for flapping his wings, diving to attack the player, and a damage frame for when he gets hit and knocked back. Then I got him in engine and got all his logic set up for fighting the player. Once he was working, I made this cute little octopus boy, and he's very adorable, and I love him very, very much. Now, I decided I wanted him to be a projectile-based enemy, so I first animated him spitting out a little ink ball. The actual ink ball gets spawned independently from the character, so it's not in the animation. Then I decided that I wanted him to vanish and reappear some distance away from the player when he takes damage, so that he can keep distance and continue shooting projectiles. So I made an animation for vanishing in what's supposed to look like a cloud of ink, as well as an animation for reappearing from a different cloud of ink. Now, the ink clouds don't look particularly great, they kind of just look like random pixels, and I was planning on cleaning them up a little, but I completely forgot about it until I really didn't have any time left to fix it up. I also made my octopus boy this cute little idle animation that I love, as well as I started making a taking damage animation for him before I realized I wouldn't need that because of the vanish animation that I just set up. Now, I got my octo boys in engine and mostly set up, but I was lower on time than I anticipated because of the explosion, so I moved on to making the art for my plant men. Now, I drew him an idle animation, a walking animation, as well as a damage frame. I also wanted to give him some sort of attack, but it was getting late, and after 3 failed attempts at some sort of attack animation, all of which I was really struggling with, I decided he doesn't need an attack, so I went to bed. I figured I'd add one later if I had extra time, but spoiler alert, I didn't have extra time, so he's in the game with no attack and just kind of meanders around. But that does bring us to day 4. So outside of my main character and my cute little octopus boy, my game was still mad ugly. So it was time to add some environment art. I created a simple and easy tile set based on having some dying grass on top of a rocky mountainous cliff type of thing, and then I needed a nice parallaxing background. Now, my biggest weakness in game dev is environment art, especially when it comes to backgrounds, so I really needed to look for some inspiration on what I wanted to do here. So while I was looking, I found myself on the YouTube channel of my good buddy, Neat Games. He just started a new project, which is a Metroidvania called Sphere, and it looks like it's going to be really cool, and I'm excited to see devlogs he puts out for that. But I actually ended up watching his GMTK Game Jam video, where he made this awesome platformer called RoboJoin that had this gorgeous parallaxing background, just beautiful. So I analyzed what he did to make that beautiful background, and then tried to recreate those steps, but for my own background. And what I ended up doing was making 3 layers of mountainous terrain, and then 3 layers of forest terrain, with each layer being less detailed than the last. Then I pulled that into the game and set up some basic parallaxing code, as well as adding the tile set and some fog for basic ambiance, and now at the end of day 4, we have a pretty good looking game on our hands. And now we're on to day 5. And day 5 is for making the boss, or more accurately, starting on the boss. Now, I didn't really have a plan for what I wanted the boss to be, but when I sat down at my desk and looked over to my left, I saw this little guy, the Plague Doctor. Now, I love my little Plague Doctor. INSANDIO gave him to me for our 2-year anniversary, and I've been wanting to make him the main character of a Game Jam game for a long time, because he's so adorable. But I haven't really had an opportunity for it. But I realized that a big, scary, strong Plague Doctor would actually make for a really cool boss fight, and I could finally use this good boy in one of my games. So I got to pixeling. I started with making a simple floating animation to use when he's either idling or moving, and then I had to decide on what I wanted him to actually do. I decided on having 3 attacks, 2 that happen in the main arena where you can actually fight him, and 1 like signature attack where he goes into the background and unleashes the plague. By having 2 main arena moves and 1 background move, I can keep the main arena fight interesting and varied, while using the background plague move to break up the pacing and keep you on your toes. So the first thing to tackle was making his floating animation for when he enters the background, which was just making him smaller, facing the camera, and changing the colors a bit so that he blends in with the background tones. Then it was time for his arena attacks. The first attack I wanted was one where he swings his lantern and yells, which summons lanterns into the stage and then shoot energy between them. I wanted this attack to be his main window of vulnerability from the time he starts the animation to when the lanterns actually deal their damage. That's when you can get in there and get some hits in. His second attack, I wanted him to absorb into his mask and then track your position a bit before doing a super anime lock-on and then dashing at you. I thought this would be good because for his lantern attack, you want to close the gap and deal damage, but for the mask attack, you want to make distance so you can dodge. I thought these 2 attacks would force the player to constantly keep moving to take advantage of the entire arena. And then I made the animations for his plague attack. I wanted him to be able to use the attack in any direction, left, right, or up, just so that the fight wouldn't get repetitive. So I animated this attack for each of the directions. The actual cast of the ability is 8 frames long, but the last 4 frames of the cast animation in each direction also serve as the channeling animation that plays while he's doing the attack in that direction. And with all of those animations done, I pulled him into the game to get started on the boss. Now, I spent a lot of time on the boss fight design and the animations, so I didn't actually get too much done beyond like basic setup when it came to actually getting the boss into the game. I left that for day 6. So today was the day for getting the boss fight completely figured out and completed. I started with designing and building the actual arena for the boss fight to happen in, and then getting the appropriate camera locks in place. Then I added the lantern attack by making a sprite for the lanterns that he summons and adding a cool blasting effect between the lanterns when he summons them during his lantern attack animation. Then I made his dash attack where he gets sucked into the mask, and I added a cool red laser from the mask's eye to the player, as well as making the mask rotate so that the eye follows the player. And then the laser disappears when lock-on happens, which gives the player a small lead time to react to the actual attack. Then I set up his plague attack, which starts with him moving into the background and parallaxing with it. Then I created a plague ball sprite, added a particle effect for him actually shooting the plague balls in the background, and then the full-size version of the plague balls spawn just off screen in the correct direction before firing across to try and hit the player. And this special attack worked out great. I'm really happy with the end result here, especially how he parallaxes in the background. It feels so cool. Even the color blending effect is really sick, because when he's in the context of the background, your brain kinda sees his colors as the same as when he's in the foreground. Like, look at this, don't the colors look the same? Even though, if you look in the ASprite file, clearly they're different colors. So it came out really nice, and I'm really pleased with it. So after getting all the pieces set up, I built the actual AI for the boss. Now, my boss AI is pretty complex, because AI is something that I'm quite good at. And I could go into details on this for like an hour. But to keep this video as short as I possibly can while still discussing everything, I'll just give you the high-level overview of how my boss fight AI works. So the boss understands how to make decisions, and he makes decisions based on his aggression level, which increases as he takes damage. Additionally, at certain health thresholds, you trigger his plague attack, which means he goes and does that attack, and it increases his danger level, which just controls some of the specific details of the fight, like how many follow-up mask attacks he does, and how many lanterns he summons, that sort of thing. Now, the boss also has a confidence level, which increases as he doesn't take damage. So the more you don't hit him, the more confident he gets in the fight. And once he reaches enough confidence, it triggers a plague attack, but decreases his aggression level and his confidence back to 0. This means it punishes you for not getting any attacks in, but it also reduces the aggression level, which gives you more openings to go and actually deal damage. So you get punished, but then it makes it easier for you since you were struggling to actually get damage, and that's why he got confident in the first place. These confidence triggers don't actually affect the danger level of the fight at all, it just decreases the aggression to give you more opportunities to hit him. Now, there are a few more interesting things that are going on under the hood, but like I said, we gotta get the complexities of the boss AI aside, and move on to day 7. Now, the first couple hours of day 7 were spent cleaning up and tweaking some of the details of the boss fight that I didn't quite get to the day before, as well as some playtesting and adjustments to make sure the fight was feeling correct with all the different settings that the AI could have. Then, I moved on to the UI. I made the player's health bar and stamina bar, as well as the boss's HP bar. And I also set up some little flourishes when it takes damage, just to make the health bars a little bit more exciting. And then it was time to build the actual game. I finished up the little bits of enemy code that were left over from day 3, and then I had all the pieces. I had the tiles, I had the enemies, I had the boss's lair, which also contained the boss fight. All I needed to do was take those pieces and turn it into the game. I decided to make the level leading up to the boss fight like baby difficulty. And that's because I realized that my game is about the boss fight. It's the most interesting part of the gameplay by a mile. My initial level designs were a little more challenging and a little more interesting, but if a single player died and quit playing before getting to the boss fight, then the design has failed for this game jam. And that's because in a game jam, most players want a short and sweet experience that they get the gist of before moving on. Most players in a game jam will quit playing your game as soon as they feel like they can, especially if they perceive it as too difficult. And I'm not faulting them for that. That's just the nature of a game jam. You have to play as many games as possible to get your game noticed. And that means if you realize you can move on from a game, you do it because you gotta squeeze them all into what limited time you have to actually review other games. And if that's what the player's mindset is gonna be for a game jam, you have to take that into account as a game designer. And because I wanted as many people as possible to have fun playing my game, it means I needed to make sure players could pretty easily get to the boss fight without dying and giving up. And like I said, the boss fight's the most interesting part of my game anyway, especially since I didn't put a whole lot of time into interesting level design. I put a whole lot of time into interesting boss fight design. So I didn't feel too bad about making the level extremely easy to get through. I also added a checkpoint right before the boss fight, so that if you die while you're fighting the boss, you don't have to play the level again. You can just get right to him. And I even ended up adding checkpoints throughout the stage later, just in case people died before they got to the boss, to make sure that they got to the boss as easily as they possibly could. I mean, that's the point of the game. But that brings me to the follow-up point for my level design difficulty, and that's the difficulty of the boss fight. Because despite everything I just said, I still chose to make the boss fight pretty difficult. I mean, to me, that's the point of a boss fight. It's supposed to take several attempts where you learn and master the boss's patterns, as well as getting a good sense of how the fight's gonna go, so that you can get that upper hand and finally take victory over a really tough enemy. You know, super Mega Man style. And I want it to feel really good when you finally get that victory. And the best way to do that is to make you have to earn it. And because I really wanted to accentuate that feeling, I actually added a hidden mechanic that I never even surfaced to the player, where anytime you die, your HP pool increases kinda dramatically. I mean, after just 2 deaths to the boss, your health pool has almost doubled. So on that 3rd attempt, not only have you figured out the boss's patterns and have a good sense of how to fight him, but your max HP pool has almost doubled, which gives you way more HP to work with in actually getting through the fight. Not only does that make it way more likely that you'll actually defeat the boss, since you're better at it and you have more HP, but also it makes you feel like you're better at fighting the boss, because you're not gonna really notice in the heat of a battle how much damage you're taking from each move. All you're gonna notice is that once you've gotten that boss to like 30% HP and you look at your HP bar, you've still got like 50% left. And that's way better than you were doing before. You must be getting better at dodging the boss's attacks. Because you have more health, you must be doing better, right? And this only works because I never tell the player that it's happening. I feel like as soon as they know that they're getting more health on each attempt, it kind of robs them of the feeling like they earned the victory. And because of the way I configured the scaling on your HP increases, if you die to the boss like 5 or 6 times, you basically end up with enough health that you can just face tank the whole thing. And even with the balancing towards this total health pool increase, the boss is still totally beatable on your 1st or 2nd try. I mean, I successfully completed a run where I killed the boss without taking any damage, but it does take a lot more skill to pull that off. And I mean, I know the boss inside and out, so of course I'm the one that's most capable of beating him without taking any damage. But I could keep discussing difficulty and balancing and how it all relates to game jams for a long time, because I'm super passionate about this subject. But instead, let's just wrap this up by saying that I spent the rest of the day setting up the level design and move on to Day 8. Now I had the core gameplay done and the main level completed, so it was time to finish all the little odds and ends that need to get done for the game to be considered complete. I made a cute little main menu with these adorable buttons that I made myself, as well as the credit screen that was required for the jam. I made the spawning effect for when you start the game or when you respawn from a checkpoint. I made little sprites for the checkpoints since there was currently no way to tell where they actually were. I added a super cool death effect for the player, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I feel like the death effect is really nice. I added a little ending station that lets you teleport away from the level after you beat the boss, and then I finished out the day by adding a little tutorial that just hovers the button prompts above the player that go away once you've pressed the right button and made it to the next tutorial trigger. I feel like this is a great way of telling the player how to play the game without anything long or lengthy or intrusive. It's just a nice little tutorial. And with all the odds and ends done, we are now at day 9. He plays StarCraft. First and most importantly, I have hot water again. Woohoo! So anyway, I dedicated this day to like little bits of polish and particle effects and just the little details that really give a game a lot of juice. One of the most important was hit feedback. So I added shaders to the player and to the enemies so that they'd flash white when they took damage. Additionally, I used that shader to flash the player blue when they dash, as well as adding a little after effect to it for flavor. I also added a shader to the checkpoints so that they have a cool effect when you activate them, as well as adding death particles for all 3 different enemy types. But what I spent the most time on was the death effect for the boss, because I really wanted killing the boss to feel amazing. So I went and looked at how they did it in the Mega Man X games, because I think those games have some of the coolest boss death effects. And I just analyzed what all the different factors were for making the death effect. There's an explosion particle, there's a screen fade, there's a boss silhouette that fades in and then fades out. And I took all those pieces and I put them in my boss death effect. I also added a slow-mo effect to the player so that they can just like hang in the air or, swing the sword slowly from the ground and really savor that final blow. Plus, it just looks cool to be moving in slow motion as the boss explodes around you. And again, I think that this effect turned out really sweet, and I'm super happy with it. And with that, we're at the dawn of the final day. Day 10. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with everything gameplay-wise, but the game is totally silent. Luckily, we have Insandio in the squad, and she was ready to bust out some amazing music, and you should be able to hear it in the background right now. Now, that's the main track for the game, but she also made this intro screen and a track for the boss fight. Additionally, Insandio provided voice acting for the main character, which is sick as hell. She made jumping sounds, attacking sounds, death sounds. Basically, any sound that Isadora needed, Insandio provided it, no problems whatsoever. And they sound awesome. And since Insandio did such a good job voice acting for the main character, it made me really want to try voice acting for all the enemies and the boss. Now, you can hear my bat screeches, my Octoboy sounds, and my Plantman grunts. And I'm pretty happy with all of them. Now, for the main boss fight, I wanted him to have recognizable callouts for all of his different attacks, Die for his mask attack, Burn for his lantern attack, and Plague for his plague attack. Now, I did an initial recording for each of the lines, Burn, and then heavily altered it with extra layers and pitch-shifted echoes and reverb to just make it sound way scarier and more like an ethereal plague doctor boss. Burn, burn, burn. And after that, I just went out and either created or found sound effects for everything else the game needed, like sword swooshes or footsteps, that sort of thing. And I actually just went and counted, and my game has more than 200 unique sound effects in it. 207 sound effects to be exact. So that's where my entire last day of work went. It went to just getting 207 sound effects into the game properly. And that was it. I put a link to the game in the description. So if you haven't played it yet, you should really go check it out, and then come back here and leave me a comment telling me what you think of the game. I worked really hard on it, and I'm really proud of it, and I'd love for people to give it a chance. Also, give this video a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I would really appreciate it. It seriously means a lot to me. I just hit 1,000 subscribers, and I'm so pumped, man. I'm also working on a 1,000 subscriber special that should be coming soon, so make sure you turn on the notifications so you can see when that video gets uploaded. And if you want even more content featuring this gorgeous face, me and Insandio have been uploading Let's Play content and stream highlights to our new channel called Taken Player. I'll also put a link to that channel in the description, so you should head on over and check out the content and subscribe to that channel if you like it. Now, this video is already super long, and that's enough shilling for the end of a video anyway. So I just want to end this video by saying thanks to Vimlark and 8bits to Infinity for hosting this game jam. It was really fun, and these communities are awesome, and I was super glad to be a part of them for this jam. Hanging out in Vimlark's stream and watching him playtest the games was a great time. I had a lot of fun. So that's it. I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye! My cat won't stop yelling, dude. My cat just won't stop yelling. My cat's like, you're recording a video? What if I sing you a song, my guy? Meow, meow.